What if the Bible, as you know it, isn't the full story? Imagine walking into a sun-blasted desert cave and finding scrolls sealed away for 2 millennia. Inside, words older than some parts of Scripture itself, verses, prophecies, and laws that challenge what generations believed was complete. These are the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest surviving biblical manuscripts on earth, hidden before the rise of Christianity, preserved by time and secrecy. And now, artificial intelligence is uncovering details even scholars missed for 70 years. Could these forgotten lines rewrite the history of faith and reveal what was never meant to be read? For over 70 years, the Dead Sea Scrolls have been a puzzle, scattered fragments of ancient manuscripts discovered by accident in the Judean desert. And yet, they've become one of the most important archaeological finds in human history. They're not just old writings. They're the oldest known biblical manuscripts, some dating centuries before the birth of Jesus. Imagine holding a piece of parchment, knowing it was written while the events of the Old Testament were still shaping the world. The scrolls include familiar books, Genesis, Isaiah, Deuteronomy, but also hidden texts never seen in any modern Bible, rules, songs, prophecies, even mysterious community laws. For decades, scholars tried to connect the dots, but their work was slow, painstaking, and limited by what the human eye could see. Now, technology has changed everything. Artificial intelligence is revealing details invisible for generations, patterns in handwriting, fragments matched with impossible precision, and perhaps answers to questions we didn't dare ask. It all began in 1947, with something as simple as a lost goat. A young Bedouin shepherd, wandering the rugged limestone cliffs near Qumran by the Dead Sea, was searching for his animal when he tossed a small stone into a dark cave. He expected only the dull echo of rock on rock, but instead, a sharp, hollow crash rang out, the sound of pottery shattering after 2,000 years of silence. Curious, he climbed inside and found tall clay jars, some empty, others sealed tight with their fragile contents still hidden. Inside them were ancient scrolls wrapped in linen, manuscripts that had somehow survived the centuries in the arid desert air. These weren't random notes or forgotten lists. They were Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient manuscripts written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, dating back to a time before much of the Bible was even finalized. As word spread, scholars and archaeologists rushed to Qumran, igniting one of the most intense archaeological hunts in history. Over the next decade, 11 more caves were uncovered, each revealing treasures. Fragments from every book of the Hebrew Bible except Esther, mysterious psalms never seen before, detailed community rules, and prophetic writings that seemed to speak from another age. It wasn't just the content that stunned the world. It was the preservation. Words penned 2 millennia ago, still sharp enough to read, as if the ink had only dried yesterday. It felt like opening a time capsule meant for no one, and yet here it was, laid bare under the desert sun. Some believed the scrolls were hidden during a time of war, perhaps by a religious sect desperate to protect their sacred writings. Others whispered that they might hold texts deliberately kept out of the Bible we know today. The Dead Sea Scrolls quickly became more than relics. They became a bridge to a lost world, a puzzle whose pieces spanned centuries. But with every answer they offered, new questions emerged. Questions about the Bible's origins, about forgotten traditions, about the people who guarded these secrets so fiercely. And as more caves yielded their treasures, the mystery only deepened. From the moment the scrolls reached the hands of scholars, the real challenge began, piecing them together. You see, what the Bedouin shepherd found wasn't a stack of neat, complete books. Many scrolls were intact, yes, but most were in fragments, some so tiny they could rest on the tip of your finger. Imagine being handed a shredded library, with the pages scattered across millennia, and being told, "Put it back together." That was the task before the experts. At first, it was all done by hand. Magnifying glasses, bright lamps, and endless patience. Scholars spent years studying letter shapes, ink density, parchment texture, even the way fibers tore. A single match between two fragments could take days of careful comparison. And here's the thing. These weren't just random puzzle pieces. Every word, every letter carried potential meaning that could challenge or confirm centuries of religious tradition. One misplaced fragment could alter an interpretation, shifting our understanding of theology or history. The variety of texts only made the work more complex. Alongside familiar passages from Genesis, Deuteronomy, and Isaiah, scholars found writings no one had ever seen before. Apocalyptic visions, priestly instructions, and even a strange copper scroll that listed what sounded like buried treasures. Were these literal treasures hidden in the desert? Or spiritual treasures, coded for a select few to understand? The debate still sparks to this day. And then there were the questions of origin. Many believed the scrolls came from the Essenes, a secluded Jewish sect known for strict laws, ritual baths, and communal living. But others argued that the caves were a kind of safe deposit box during times of invasion, where scrolls from multiple groups were hidden together. Without a clear signature or owner's mark, scholars were left with educated guesses, each theory leading to a new branch of the mystery. One thing became certain. Solving this puzzle required more than history books. It needed archaeology, chemistry, theology, and a willingness to question long-held beliefs. Because hidden among these fragile fibers could be truths that not only rewrite history, but shake the foundations of faith itself. For decades, researchers leaned on a craft as old as the scrolls themselves, paleography, the study of ancient handwriting. It sounds straightforward, but it's more like forensic art. Scholars would analyze how each letter curved, how strokes began and ended, and how certain shapes appeared in one era but not another. A slight flick of the quill, a subtle tilt in a character. These could reveal the century or even the decade a text was written. But here's the catch. Paleography is deeply human, which means it's also deeply subjective. Two experts could examine the same fragment and walk away with two different conclusions. And honestly, who could blame them? They were working with fragile pieces, often faded, sometimes burned, sometimes gnawed at by centuries of desert wind. No one alive had ever seen these hands at work, so even the sharpest paleographers were making educated guesses. Brilliant ones, yes, but still guesses. That left plenty of room for debate. And debate there was. Complicating matters was something they called the paleographic gap. You see, the Dead Sea Scrolls spanned several centuries, but there weren't enough other Hebrew or Aramaic manuscripts from the same time to compare against. It's like trying to date a single photo when you've got almost no other snapshots from the same era. You can make assumptions based on hairstyles and clothing, but without other confirmed examples, it's risky business. Of course, scholars did their best. They compared styles to coins, pottery inscriptions, and even graffiti etched into ancient walls. Each clue helped, but never quite closed the case. And while paleography gave a starting point, it could rarely offer the kind of precision historians craved. Was a text written in 150 BCE or 50 years later? The difference could completely change how we interpret it in relation to historical events. This frustration, the gap between close enough and certain, was the fuel that pushed researchers toward other tools. And when they found one that promised hard science and clear dates, it seemed like the holy grail of manuscript dating. Though it came with a cost few were prepared for. Enter radiocarbon dating, the shiny new promise of the mid-20th century. To scholars desperate for precision, it was like stepping out of candlelight into electric glow. Here was a method rooted in physics, not opinion. By measuring how much carbon-14 remained in parchment, scientists could estimate exactly when the animal it came from had died. Suddenly, instead of educated guesses, they had numbers, dates, timelines with sharp edges instead of blurred outlines. But the excitement came with a gut-twisting catch. Radiocarbon dating is destructive. Even the tiniest sample, a piece barely the size of a fingernail, meant removing part of an artifact that had survived millennia. Imagine holding a priceless page that had weathered wars, sandstorms, and centuries of silence, and then cutting into it. For some researchers, it felt like sacrilege. And there was another twist. Preservation methods from the 1950s had unwittingly sabotaged the process. In an effort to protect the scrolls, early conservators had coated some with castor oil, thinking it would strengthen the parchment and darken the ink for readability. It worked, but it also contaminated the samples, skewing the results and making scrolls appear younger than they were. Decades later, scientists had to develop painstaking cleaning methods just to undo that well-meaning mistake. Even when samples were clean, radiocarbon dating wasn't flawless. Climate variations, calibration issues, and the fact that parchment could be stored for years before being written on all introduced uncertainty. A scroll could test as decades older than the words it carried. The precision everyone hoped for was still slightly out of reach. This was the crossroads, two powerful tools, paleography and radiocarbon dating, each with strengths and crippling weaknesses. The puzzle pieces were on the table, but the picture was still incomplete. And just when it seemed there was no way forward without sacrifice, an entirely new kind of player stepped onto the stage. That's when artificial intelligence, once a concept reserved for science fiction, became the unexpected hero of an ancient mystery. No more relying solely on human eyesight or risking damage to irreplaceable relics. Instead, scholars could unleash algorithms capable of detecting patterns invisible to even the most trained experts. It was like handing the scrolls to a superhuman scribe who could read every curve, every dot, every ink trace, and never blink. Enter Enoch, a specially designed AI system named after the biblical figure celebrated for wisdom and insight. The symbolism wasn't lost on the team. Before Enoch could read, though, researchers had to feed it a clean, reliable dataset. That meant years of preparation, starting with the delicate removal of the castor oil residues from tiny fragments. It was a process so precise that even a speck of contamination could throw everything off. Once clean samples were ready, they were photographed in stunningly high resolution, so detailed that the AI could analyze microscopic ink strokes and parchment textures. Enoch's neural networks separated ink from background, transforming each letter into a digital fingerprint. Every flick of the pen, every tiny variance in pressure became data points in its vast mental library. The results were astonishing. Enoch could cross-reference handwriting styles with securely dated samples, producing age estimates with a margin of error as small as 30 years, a level of precision scholars had only dreamed about. More importantly, it did this without harming the scrolls, preserving every fragment for future study. And yet, as with any leap forward, the arrival of AI didn't just answer questions. It stirred up new ones. Because when Enoch began spitting out dates and stylistic connections, some of them didn't just refine the old timelines. They shattered them. The first shockwaves hit when Enoch dated certain fragments far earlier than anyone had dared imagine. For decades, scholars had placed these texts neatly within specific centuries, based on paleography, radiocarbon tests, and historical cross-references. But Enoch's findings? They didn't just tweak those dates. They rewrote them. Some scrolls weren't 20 or 30 years off. They were older by 100, even 150 years. Suddenly, documents thought to belong to a post-Hasmonean world were now bumping elbows with events from the late 4th century BCE. This wasn't just an academic shuffle of footnotes. If these dates hold, it means that Jewish scribal culture, with its theologians, poets, and historians, was already flourishing well before the political rise of the Hasmonean kingdom. Imagine discovering that Shakespeare's plays were being performed decades before he was even born. That's the magnitude of the shift we're talking about. Two fragments, in particular, sent historians into overdrive, one from the Book of Daniel, the other from Ecclesiastes. Both had been thought to hail from the late 2nd century BCE. Enoch's recalibration suggested they might have been copied during, or frighteningly close to, the lifetimes of their original authors. Holding these would be like holding the very ink strokes laid down as the words were first conceived. The AI also blurred long-held distinctions between Hasmonean and Herodian script styles. Previously, scholars believed these styles belonged to separate eras. Enoch's data hinted at a far more flexible and overlapping scribal culture, where script choice could vary by region, training, or even personal taste. The idea that these styles were rigidly chronological. That belief suddenly looked shaky. But perhaps the most jarring revelation was this. Many of the scrolls Enoch dated predated the earliest known settlement at Qumran, which meant the caves weren't necessarily where they were written, They might have been hiding places, stashes created during crises like the Jewish-Roman Wars. The scrolls, it seemed, were about to tell a far messier and far more intriguing story than anyone had planned for. When Enoch's findings went public, the academic world lit up, and not entirely with applause. Some scholars saw the AI as a long-overdue breakthrough, a tool capable of stripping away the subjective guesswork that had clouded Dead Sea Scrolls research for decades. Lead researcher Mladen Popovich described Enoch as a time machine for handwriting, a phrase that instantly grabbed headlines and stirred imaginations. The idea of traveling back through pen strokes to glimpse the scribes themselves was too captivating to ignore. Supporters pointed out that Enoch wasn't here to replace human paleographers but to work alongside them. It was the ultimate collaboration between ancient skill and modern tech. In fact, in trials, Enoch's dating aligned with expert judgments about 79% of the time, a striking overlap that suggested the machine was reinforcing, not erasing, decades of human expertise. But not everyone was convinced. Veteran paleographer Christopher Rolston, for example, raised a critical red flag over the dating of 4Q114, a Daniel manuscript. Enoch placed it as early as 230 BCE, yet parts of Daniel's text reference events from 167 BCE. To Rolston, this wasn't just a technical quibble, it was a reminder that AI can't read history in the human sense. It can't weigh theological nuance or understand the cultural ripples behind the words. Other skeptics pointed to the small dataset Enoch was trained on. In machine learning, limited data can lead to bias or fragile conclusions. Could the AI's confidence be masking blind spots? Brent Seals, a computer scientist in the field, acknowledged the brilliance of the approach but warned that scalability might be its Achilles heel. So the divide grew. On one side, those who saw Enoch as a revolutionary partner. On the other, those who feared that over-reliance on algorithms could skew centuries of careful scholarship. Yet, even in the criticism, one thing was clear: Enoch had forced the field to confront its own boundaries, and to imagine what might happen when those boundaries are pushed even further. In the end, Enoch's work didn't just shuffle dates on a chart. It redrew the map of an entire era. If even a portion of these scrolls truly predate the Qumran settlement, it means their origins lie far beyond the narrow valleys of the Dead Sea. They might have traveled through the hands of scholars, priests, or even refugees before finding their resting place in the caves. This reframing doesn't diminish their significance. It amplifies it. For biblical historians, the implications are seismic. Some manuscripts, like the Daniel and Ecclesiastes fragments, could now align with the lifetimes of their authors, not generations later. That's like discovering a first edition Shakespeare penned during the playwright's own life. It's the difference between hearing a story retold and hearing it straight from the source. And then there's the cultural ripple effect. If the Dead Sea Scrolls were circulating centuries earlier than we thought, it reshapes the narrative of Jewish thought and scriptural development. It means theological debates, liturgical practices, and even political movements might have been brewing much earlier than recorded history admits. The texts become snapshots of living communities, not relics locked in time. Even for skeptics, this is fertile ground. New dating doesn't automatically settle authorship, but it opens fresh trails for research and challenges old assumptions that may have sat untested for too long. It's as if the field has been handed a second chance to ask better questions. Yet perhaps the most intriguing part is what remains unsolved. For all of Enoch's precision, the scrolls still keep their deepest secrets. Who exactly penned them? Were they meant for public teaching, private devotion, or coded messages for an initiated few? And just how many more revelations might be hiding in the fragments that still haven't been examined? So here's the thing. The Dead Sea Scrolls aren't just brittle pieces of parchment tucked away in museum drawers. They're living witnesses to a time when faith, politics, and culture were colliding in ways that still echo today. Thanks to AI, we can now step closer to those ancient voices than ever before, but every answer we uncover seems to come wrapped in two new questions. And maybe that's the point, because in a way, the scrolls are mirrors. They reflect not just the beliefs of the people who wrote them, but our own hunger to know where we came from, what shaped us, and how much of our story is still hidden. It's a reminder that history is not a static record. It's a conversation, and we're just the latest voices in it. Think about it. What if your most deeply held beliefs had roots you never knew existed? What if a text you thought you understood was actually written in a different time by different hands for reasons history never told you? That's the level of perspective these findings bring. And here's where you come in. Don't just be a spectator to history, engage with it. Read about the Dead Sea Scrolls, dive into debates, challenge what you think you know. The more you explore, the more pieces of the puzzle you'll find. If this journey through time and technology sparked your curiosity, do one thing right now. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves history as much as you do, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. History's biggest secrets are still out there, and together, we're going to find them.